of the pioneers of boating in Clearwater was Betty McGraw Perkins. She sailed several boats built by Clark Mills and was an avid flyer as well. Sally Parks of the Palm Harbor Historical Society interviewed Betty recently about how she came to Clearwater and her many life adventures.
Well, we moved here in 1943, and my father-in-law came down in 42 and bought a big grapefruit grove in Palm Harbor. And when he got here, he called us and said, "There's a little bus line in Clearwater for sale. Why don't you come down and look at it?" See, my father-in-law was the one who started the Greyhound lines. And my husband was in the bus business at the time. So we didn't know where Clearwater was, and we'd never been to Florida, but I said, yes, we'll come down. So we came down, 1943. We looked at everything. We looked at the bus line. It was Clearwater Transit, and Hall's Taxi was the name of it. And it had a couple of little buses that looked like bread wagons, and about 27 cars in an old garage in the taxi system. We looked at it, and we looked at Clearwater, and 6 weeks later we were here.
Wow.
Bag and baggage. We went down to the Bank of Clearwater, borrowed some money from Waller Smith, I think probably about 2% interest at that time. Bought the little bus line. Mm-hmm. And we ran the bus line. It went from Clearwater to the beach, Clearwater to Dunedin, and Clearwater to Largo. It was 10 cents a ride. Wow. And operated the taxi system too, which was on downtown on North Fort Harrison. We sold almost everything we owned because we bought a furnished house on Clearwater Beach. Very small house, the first house going south on Gulf Boulevard.
What's there now?
The Hyatt Hotel. Our little house would be right in the middle of the Hyatt Hotel now.
And how much did you pay for that house, do you know?
Yeah, we paid $10,000. It was completely furnished, everything. Furniture, pots and pans, linens, everything.
Now,
and we thought that was a terrible price.
Oh, I know.
And there were 6 empty lots and then our house going south. Mm-hmm. And there was a row of little houses along Gulf Boulevard. And at that time, there was no building. It was during the war. So people would buy a lot on Gulf Boulevard. And they'd buy a little house in town, and they'd move it at night, and in the morning it would be there.
Really? Mm.
That's how all those little houses got there. When we talked to the realtor, he said everything here happens at the Clearwater Yacht Club. So we went right over and joined. It was $25. Then we went out and bought an old mullet boat for $25. We were boating people. Mm-hmm. And we started going out in the little boat and fishing. Mm-hmm. And we had been in Michigan. We didn't know about tides and flats.
So you learned those things quickly.
Well, the first thing we did was run aground. Well, I had sailed before I moved here. I had a sailboat. And we had several motorboats first. We had a boat that was built by Clark Mills in Dunedin. Mm-hmm. And that's what I brought the pictures of. Mm-hmm. And it was designed by John Alden, a very famous marine architect. He built this catboat for us. And then he and Frank Levinson bought the Clearwater Bay Marineways, and that's where our other boat was built, the Calusa. And that's where he was when he designed the pram. I've seen it all over the world. France, Spain, Hawaii, every place.
What's your favorite
Well,
thing to
Clarky built me a special little boat.
Oh,
I had it at home there where you were this morning on my dock. And I used to sail out after the children went to school. And then we had a variety of sailboats, and we had one built in Connecticut, in Stonington, Connecticut. And we sailed that one home over 2,000 miles.
wow.
I have pictures of that too. And after the Stonington, John Alden designed the Calusa, which was the last boat I had. And that was a beautifully designed boat and built by Clark Mills. Took him a year to build it. And it was built of mahogany planking, was entirely wood, had Sitka spruce spars and teak below the water, and had a combination keel and centerboard. So it was designed for this area, you know, so if you hit a sandbar, you could pull the centerboard out. It has a mast forward and one big sail. It was 16 feet long, an 8-foot beam. It was very beamy and very good sailing boat. We were one of the first boats over there at the marina.
Benny, can I?
Pardon?
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, previous to that, we had had a couple of motorboats we kept at the Marineways.
Okay.
That was boat works there and a marina. And that's where they built all these boats. And we launched the Calusa in 1958, and my husband died in 1960. And this was supposed to be a second honeymoon boat, and we just had it a very short time before he died. So I tried to sell the boat. It was a very expensive boat. And I never did get a decent offer, or I'd get somebody who didn't come up to my expectation. Anyhow, what I did was learn to sail the boat myself. It was quite a large boat. And Clarky said, the only way you're going to get your money out of this boat is keep it and enjoy it, which is what I did. I think I had it about 50 years. 34 overall, that's with the bowsprit. And it was a very, very seaworthy. It was a very heavy boat. And while I had it, I went in all the races. It was not a racing boat, but it was a lot of fun just to get into the race.
Sure.
And I started trying to finish the races, but usually the wind would die down, you know, and I'd miss the party. So after that, I'd get into the start, and after everybody passed me, I'd turn around and come back.
You could be the first one to the
First
party.
over the finish line. Well, the Calusa was underpowered. It just had a 25 horsepower auxiliary engine. And a lot of times that didn't work. And I remember one time I was coming in with my all-girl crew, and there was a very strong east wind. So I was sailing into the wind. I couldn't sail under the bridge because the wind was directly on the bow. And the engine wasn't strong enough to get me in. So people would stop and help me. They were very nice. So that day a little boat stopped, and he, you know, I realized he couldn't possibly tow me in, a big heavy boat. So I said, you go to the marina and tell the man who owns the Rainbow, and he'll come out and get me. So it just happened that the owner of the Rainbow was there. It was a big head boat, you know, a big fishing boat.
Yeah, right.
So out comes the Rainbow. And they come out and throw me a line, I tie it around the bollard, and they tow me under the bridge. And that's the first time that boat, it wasn't built to plane, but that's the fastest I ever went. And then I
that-
had an all-girl crew. I had the first all-girl crew in Clearwater.
Really?
I had Mary June Burwell and Cornelia Gauze and Dodie Clark. And the four of us sailed that, but we went out once a week, just the four of us in the daytime. We had 1 day a week we went out in the boat. You know, when the Pram started, the businessmen sponsored them. And I have a picture of one in there that says Gulf Coast Motor Line. We owned the Gulf Coast Motor Line later after the Clearwater Transit. And we had a Pram, Gulf Coast Motor Line, Clearwater Transit. And my boys sailed those in the Pram. They were both in the Pram fleet. And I sailed one. You know, we had one at home, and we used to go down to the Cabana Club. We had one there. And the Pram started out to cost not over $50. I don't know if you knew that. Did you know that? The reason that it was designed the way it is, because they wanted to have the sailboat substitute for the roller coasters that used to go down Cleveland Street. They wanted a boat that was inexpensive, could be sailed by a small child, and it was very safe. Well, they made it out of one sheet of plywood. And it was a boat that a father and son could build out of one sheet of plywood. And the reason it has a vertical pram, you know, it's horizontal pram, is because if they'd made a pointed pram, it would have been more expensive. So that's how it started out. I had an original Clarkey Mills pram. At the time the yacht club was planning to expand, I gave it to the yacht club, and then they decided not to expand and gave it to the sailing center. Because one of the things I was instrumental in was working on getting a sailing center for Clearwater. Well, first of all, I was a charter member of the Windjammers. There was a very small group of us in Clearwater who sailed. And then it became very popular. And we used to meet once a month over at the marina. And we had races all the time. And then some of the ladies wanted their own group, and they didn't want any men involved. So they started the Windlasses. That's how that started.
Else?
Yeah, I've been sailing in Greece. One of my flying friends had a friend in Indiana who was originally from Greece, and he had a yacht in Athens. And this friend called me one day, and he said, "How would you like to go sailing in Greece?" And I said, "Fine." And he said, "Well, we're chartering a boat out of Athens after the Rotary Convention in Switzerland." That was the year that Riley was president-elect, and we were going to Switzerland. I said, "Okay, we'll meet you there." At that time, I didn't really know where Athens was. But we met them there. And there was another couple, friends of theirs from Texas. We were all pilots. We were all pilots on the boat. And we sailed a week in the Greek islands. We went to 13 different islands. And we had such a wonderful time and got along so beautifully with each other that 2 years later, we went back and sailed for about a month. We started in Sorrento and went over to the Isle of Capri, did all the Italian islands, and went around the boot and up the backside of Italy and through the Corinthian Canal back to Athens. We were about a month doing that. Well, my hands one day swelled up like meatballs. They were red and swollen, couldn't use them at all. And there was no dermatologist, then. The Sudler Hood was my doctor. And he tried everything and sent me to Tampa. and they couldn't figure out what it was. Everything they asked me, I'd been doing. So one day I was fishing, and everybody had a fish on the line. So I went, we had a little fish subduer, you know. We'd hit the fish, subdue them, and then put them in the box.
In the box, yeah.
And the slime went on my hands, and my hands swelled up immediately, and then I knew what it was. So after that, you know, I couldn't touch the fish. They'd have to bait my hook and take my fish off. The bay was solid fish, and the mullet men used to come at night and put their nets right in front of my house. They'd come back at 5 in the morning and pull them in, which was great fun for the children and the dogs. And then we had right at our house, my oldest son used to get up every morning at 5 o'clock and fish. We had brim, we had trout, we had snapper, we had everything there. We had crabs. I used to have a crab line on the dock. I'd put about 6 crab lines out and keep the pot boiling. Run down, scoop up the crabs, put the bait back in the water, run up the hill and put the crabs in the pot.
Did you ever go scalloping in Clearwater Harbor?
Oh, yeah. You know, there are a lot of freshwater springs. Did you do that? There's one up near Ozona we used to go up. And
Yeah. Up near Crystal Beach,
Yeah.
there's one up off the end float.
there's some right in front of my house.
Are there?
There's quite a few freshwater springs there. And my neighbor had a casing around her spring in front of her house. She finally took it away because my dog would go down. You know, at low tide, it would capture some fish down there. My dog would go down and bark at the fish.
Betty was also quite the flyer in her younger days and had her own airplane.
Well, I think I was inspired by Lindbergh way back when I was little. And one day, I was at an airport, and I had $1. And they were taking people up for a penny a pound, and I went up twice. And I was hooked. But I didn't get a chance.
Was that here in Florida or what?
Oh, no,
back
that
in
was
Michigan?
up north. So when I was in college, the government taught 10,000 college students to fly. You know, colleges all over the country. And so it wouldn't look military. They let 10% be women. So I got in on the very first year of that. I got my license in 1940. And then I moved to Michigan. And while I was there, the war broke out, and they called all the pilots. And while I was there, I was in the Civil Air Patrol, which was attached to the Army Air Corps. And I flew a lot of missions during the war. And then they chose me and another lady to teach instrument flying. And they gave us this course. We went down this basement at night, learned how to instrument fly in the link trainer. And then they picked us to teach the men who were in the Army Air Corps instrument flying. And just when I finished the course was when we moved to Clearwater in 1943. And Tampa, what's now Tampa, was a bomber base. And what's now St. Pete Clearwater was a fighter base. In order for me to fly, I had to either go to Davis Island or Albert Woodard.
The Clearwater Air Park wasn't.
No, it was closed during the war. All the private little airports were closed, except the ones that were used for training.
And did they reopen in like 1945 or 46?
They reopened in 1944, Clearwater Air Park. And the Words and the Workmans and the Walkers, Toki Walker, and you know Margaret Workman. Those three couples came and opened the airport, and they had GI training there. But I had an airplane. They had the Luscombe airplanes there for sale, and that was a small aluminum airplane.
Single engine,
Yes, very small.
two-person, flying it?
And I flew that everywhere.
What do you mean by everywhere? Tell me where you flew.
Well, we owned part of a bus line then in Winter Haven too, and I used to fly the people back and forth, bus people, parts, and I flew all over Florida, every place there was an airport. We used to fly to Honeymoon Island, Sanibel, down around Boca Grande. They let us land on the golf course there. And almost everywhere you wanted to go in Florida, they someplace to land. On the end of Anna Maria Island, there was an airport there. Do you remember Peter Renaud's restaurant? Or maybe that was gone when you moved there. We used to fly people down there for dinner and go to Sanibel, pick up shells. And he had learned the same way I did. And so our first date was in an airplane.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What kind of plane was it? Do you remember?
It was a small single-engine plane. Might have been a tri-pacer. We flew over the Tampa airport and had lunch. And at that time, there was a very small building at Tampa airport. We just landed and parked right in front of the terminal and went in and had lunch and then went back. I had a Cessna 172, and when I was married to Riley, we had Beechcraft, Debonair. It was a straight-tail Bonanza. We had two of those, one after another. And then Riley was instrumental in establishing the Air Academy that was at the St. Pete Clearwater. Trying to think, National Aviation Academy. And he was the person there who had the most ratings. And during the war, when he was called, he was an American Airlines captain attached to the services, and he used to fly the ocean every other week. And I believe that was in a DC-3. 14 hours. I flew in the Powder Puff Derby, Angel Derby, Deltona Derby, Great Southern Air Race. And
they flew from where to where? Give me an example.
well, like for instance, the last Powder Puff Derby was the 30th anniversary. That was in '77. And that was from Palm Springs, California to Davis Island. In 1966, I was the hostess for the Powder Puff Derby, which was from Seattle to Clearwater.
A Powder Puff Derby is actually a race, right?
Yes, international. A women's international race sponsored by the 99s, which is the group that was started by Amelia Earhart. There were 99 women pilots. And there are a lot of them now, a lot of 99s now, but at the time, it was very small. Well, the men always wanted to get into the race. And so they had a lawsuit wanting to get in. And the women never wanted them in. I mean, some of them were really rabid about it, not wanting any men in it. So the lawsuit went on, and then they had to change the name of the race. and they changed it to the Air Race Classic. It was still the international race, 99 cross country. And it's now called the Air Race Classic. In order to be in it, you had to have flown in the Powder Puff Derby. So we still kept the men out.
Rotary has always been a big part of your life. At least I know you
Yeah.
from recent
Now,
years.
my first husband and Dave were both directors of the Clearwater Rotary Club in 1947. I found a clipping in my desk. My second husband, Riley, he was president, I think it was in 74, and I was a very active Rotarian before women could be Rotarians. And then as soon as they were allowed to take women, they invited me to join the Bel Air Club. That was formed with women. And I like to be of service in everything I've been doing. I was always a part of it.
Betty McGraw Perkins was a large part of the rich history of Clearwater. Her contributions were of a great benefit to the coastal community of Pinellas County. To view other visual histories of Pinellas pioneers, please visit mlrproductions.tv, also palmharbormuseum.com, and pinellascounty.org/heritage. Thank you for watching.